The dust that rose from Clara Bennett's boots as she stormed down the main street of Silverton, Nevada, in the summer of 1884, carried with it every ounce of fury she had spent 23 years learning to contain. Her father's revolver hung heavy at her hip, its chambers empty as her prospects, and the general store behind her might as well have slammed its door in her face, even though old Milton Sharp had simply stood there shaking his head like she was asking for the moon instead of a box of cartridges. "No respectable woman needs bullets," he had said, his arms crossed over his stained apron, his eyes hard as the counter between them. "And no disrespectable woman gets them from my store." Clara had felt the heat rise in her cheeks, felt every pair of eyes in that cramped space turn toward her like she had stripped naked in the middle of Sunday service. She had tried to explain about the rattlesnake den near her property line, about the coyotes that had been circling her chicken coop for 3 nights running, about being a woman alone on her late father's claim with no man to protect her and no desire for one, either. But Milton Sharp had just shaken his head harder, his jowls quivering with the certainty of his own righteousness, and told her to find herself a husband if she needed shooting done. The other customers had nodded along. Mrs. Henderson had actually smiled, that thin-lipped expression of satisfaction that came from seeing another woman put in her place. Clara had felt something crack inside her chest, something that felt like the last piece of faith she had been holding on to about decent people doing decent things. So she had turned on her heel and walked out into the blazing afternoon sun, her eyes stinging with tears she would die before shedding in public, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The street wavered in the heat, making Silverton look like something from a fever dream, all warped edges and shimmering false promises. She had made it maybe 20 paces before she heard the door of the general store open again behind her. "Excuse me, miss." The voice was low and rough, like whiskey over gravel, and it stopped Clara in her tracks, despite her better judgment. She turned slowly, one hand instinctively going to the empty gun at her hip, and found herself looking at a man who seemed to have been assembled from spare parts of the desert itself. He was tall, broad-shouldered in a way that suggested hard work rather than idle bulk, and his face was weathered by sun and wind into something that might have been handsome if you could see past the dust. His hat was pulled low, casting shadows across eyes that she could nevertheless feel, examining her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He wore a gun belt that looked well used, the holster sitting easy on his hip like it belonged there, and his boots were scuffed nearly white from hard riding. "I am not interested," Clara said sharply, because men who followed women out of stores rarely had anything worthwhile to say, in her experience. The man stopped a respectful distance away, holding up one hand in a gesture that might have been surrender, or simply a request for patience. In his other hand, he held a small box, the kind that Clara recognized immediately even from several feet away. Ammunition. "Did not figure you were," he said, and his mouth quirked at one corner in something that was not quite a smile. "But I figured you might be interested in these." He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, and before Clara could step back or protest or do anything other than stare, he reached for her hand. His fingers were calloused and warm as they wrapped around hers, turning her palm upward with a gentleness that seemed at odds with everything else about him. Then he placed the box of cartridges in her hand and folded her fingers over it, his own hand lingering just a moment longer than strictly necessary. ".45 caliber, he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. They were blue, she realized, the color of the sky before a storm. "Looked like what your piece would take, judging by the weight of that iron you were carrying." Clara felt her breath catch in her throat. The box was solid and real in her hand, still warm from his pocket, and she could not quite process what had just happened. "I do not understand," she managed. "Nothing to understand," the man said, already stepping back, already tipping his hat to her like they had just concluded some ordinary business transaction. "Sometimes folks need shooting done and cannot get the tools for it. Seems like a problem easily solved." "I cannot pay you," Clara said quickly, hating how the words tasted like charity, like admitting weakness. "Not right now. My father just passed and the claim is not producing yet, and I have been living on what little he left, but I can pay you back when I sell my next egg harvest, or if the summer vegetables come in good, or I could—" "Not asking for payment," the man interrupted, his voice still gentle despite cutting her off. "Consider it a welcome to town gift. I have lived here for 6 months. Clara said, bewildered. Then consider me slow with my manners, he replied, and this time the almost smile reached his eyes. Name is James Cordell. Most folks call me Cord. Clara Bennett. The introduction felt automatic, drilled into her by her mother's etiquette lessons from a lifetime ago. And I cannot just accept this. It would not be proper. Figured propriety went out the window when Sharp refused you service, Cord said, and there was an edge to his voice now, something sharp beneath the easy drawl. Man like that ought to be ashamed, leaving a woman defenseless because of his own narrow thinking. Clara felt something shift in her chest, some weight she had been carrying since her father's death last winter, suddenly feeling just slightly less heavy. Thank you, she said softly, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Truly, I do not know what I would have done. Cord tipped his hat again. Just be safe out there, Miss Bennett. And if you are having trouble with predators, you might check the ridge north of town. Pack of coyotes been denning up there, causing problems for a few of the outlying properties. You take out the alpha, the rest will likely move on. He was already turning away, already heading back toward the hitching post where a big roan gelding stood waiting when Clara found her voice again. Mr. Cordell? He paused, looking back over his shoulder. Why did you do this? For a long moment, he just looked at her, and Clara felt something pass between them in that look, something she could not name but felt down to her bones. Then he shrugged, one corner of his mouth lifting again. My mama raised me to do right by people who get done wrong, he said simply. Seemed like the least I could do. Then he swung up onto his horse with the easy grace of someone who had spent more time in the saddle than out of it, touched his fingers to his hat brim one more time, and rode off down the street at an easy lope, leaving Clara standing in the dust with a box of bullets in her hand and a feeling in her chest like something had just shifted in her world. She looked down at the ammunition, solid and real and impossibly precious, and felt tears prick at her eyes again. But this time, they were not tears of frustration or humiliation. This time, they were something else entirely, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Clara made herself walk the rest of the way back to her property with measured steps, refusing to run, even though every instinct screamed at her to hurry before someone decided to take her new treasure away. The claim her father had filed sat 2 miles outside of Silverton proper, far enough that she could not easily walk to town for supplies, but close enough that she could make the trip when necessary. The land itself was scrubby and difficult, all red dirt and stubborn vegetation. But there was water from a small creek that ran through the northwest corner, and her father had managed to coax enough life from the soil to keep them fed. The house, if you could call it that, was little more than a cabin with delusions of grandeur, 3 rooms, a covered porch, and a roof that leaked in 2 places when it rained. But it was hers now, the deed signed over in her father's shaking hand, 2 days before he died, witnessed by the doctor and the preacher, so there could be no dispute. Some of the men in town had suggested she sell it, move back east where a young unmarried woman belonged. But Clara had looked at the land her father had loved and known she could not abandon it any more than she could have abandoned him. She loaded her father's revolver the moment she got inside, her hand steady despite the emotion still churning in her chest. The weight of the gun felt different now, purposeful rather than uselessly ornamental. She checked the cylinder, checked it again, then slid the weapon back into its holster with a sense of relief so profound it made her knees weak. That night, when the coyotes came sniffing around her chicken coop again, Clara was ready. She stepped out onto her porch, raised her father's gun, and fired a warning shot into the air. The predators scattered like smoke, their howls fading into the distance, and Clara stood there in her nightgown, with the gun still raised, and felt something fierce and wild bloom in her chest. She was not helpless. She did not need Milton Sharp or his approval or any man's permission to protect what was hers. But as she went back inside and carefully cleaned the revolver before returning it to its place, she found her thoughts drifting back to storm blue eyes and a gentle touch, to a man who had seen her humiliation and chosen to remedy it rather than exploit it. She wondered who James Cordell was, where he had come from, why a stranger would show her such unexpected kindness. She fell asleep that night with the questions still unanswered, but with a sense of security she had not felt in months. The next morning dawned hot and clear, the kind of day that promised to bake the desert into submission by noon. Clara was up with the sun, tending to her chickens and her small vegetable garden, hauling water from the creek in buckets that left her shoulders aching, She was wrestling with a particularly stubborn fence post that had come loose when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Her hand went automatically to her gun, but she relaxed when she recognized the roan gelding from the day before. Cord rode up to the edge of her property and dismounted, looping his reins loosely over the fence rail. "Morning, Miss Bennett," he called out, staying where he was like he understood about property lines and the importance of respecting them. "Hope I am not intruding." Clara straightened up, suddenly and painfully aware that she was covered in dirt and sweat, her hair escaping from its braid in wild curls, her dress stained and dusty. "Mr. Cordell," she managed, "I was not expecting company." "Should have sent word ahead," he agreed, "but I was riding past and thought I would check if you had any trouble with those coyotes last night." Something warm uncurled in Clara's chest at the realization that he had been thinking about her, worrying about her safety. "I fired a warning shot," she said. "They scattered quick enough." Cord nodded, looking satisfied. "Good. They are mostly cowards, coyotes. Make a lot of noise, but run when confronted." He paused, then gestured toward the fence post. "That giving you trouble?" Clara looked at the post, which had defeated her attempts to reset it for the better part of an hour. Pride warred with practicality, and practicality won by a narrow margin. "It keeps leaning no matter what I do," she admitted. "The ground is too soft here, I think. I might need to dig it deeper or brace it with rocks. Mind if I take a look?" She should have minded. She should have sent him away, maintained her independence, proved she did not need help from anyone. But the fence needed fixing, her shoulders already ached. And there was something about the way he asked, like he genuinely wanted to help rather than prove anything, that made her nod. "I would appreciate that," she said. Cord crossed into her property with the same careful respect he had shown for her person the day before, and Clara found herself studying him as he examined the fence post. In the clear morning light, she could see details she had missed in the dusty afternoon glare. He was younger than she had initially thought, probably no more than 26 or 27, though his face carried the kind of weathering that came from hard living. His hands, as he tested the post and the surrounding soil, were strong and competent, the hands of someone who had done this kind of work before. "Soil is sandy here," he said after a moment. "You are going to want to dig it down another foot at least, and pack it with rocks like you said. You got any stone you can spare?" "There is a pile by the creek," Clara told him. "I have been collecting them for various projects." "I can help you get this set right if you want," Cord offered, straightening up and meeting her eyes. "Got nothing pressing today, and it would be a shame for your chickens to get loose because of a weak fence." Clara hesitated. Accepting the bullets had been one thing, a moment of necessity that she could justify to herself as survival. But accepting his labor was something else, something that felt dangerously like dependence. "I could not ask you to do that," she said carefully. "Not asking you to ask," Cord replied easily. "Offering to help. There is a difference." "Why?" The question burst out of her before she could stop it. "Why are you doing this? You do not know me. You owe me nothing. So, why are you here helping me with my fence when you could be anywhere else doing anything else?" Cord was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was serious in a way it had not been before. "You want the honest answer? I would prefer it. Because I have been watching this town treat you like something shameful for 6 months now," he said bluntly. "Because I saw the way Sharp looked at you yesterday, and the way the other women smiled about it, and it made me angry. Because my sister was widowed young back in Texas, and I watched the way people treated her, like being a woman alone was some kind of moral failure instead of just bad luck. And because helping you fix a fence post seems like the smallest possible thing I can do to balance out the unfairness of it all." Clara felt her breath catch. "You have a sister?" "Had," Cord corrected quietly. "Fever took her 3 years ago. But I remember what it was like for her, trying to manage alone, trying to keep her dignity while everyone around her offered either charity or judgment, and nothing in between." "I am sorry for your loss," Clara said softly, and meant it. Cord nodded, accepting her condolence. "So, that is why. Because I think you deserve better than what this town has been giving you, and because I can help with a fence, even if I cannot help with much else." Clara looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. But all she saw was sincerity, plain and unvarnished, and something in her chest loosened another notch. "All right," she said finally. "I would appreciate the help, but I am making lunch, and you are staying to eat it if you are working through the morning heat." A smile spread across Cord's face, transforming his weathered features into something genuinely handsome. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "That sounds more than fair." They worked together for the next 2 hours, and Clara was surprised by how easy it felt. Cord did not hover or take over, did not treat her like she was fragile or incapable. Instead, he simply worked alongside her, offering suggestions when asked, lending his strength when needed, but otherwise letting her maintain control of her own property. They dug the hole deeper together, Clara wielding the shovel while Cord cleared away the loose dirt. They hauled rocks from her pile by the creek, making multiple trips in companionable silence. And when they finally reset the post and braced it properly, Cord stepped back and let Clara pack the final rocks into place, acknowledging that it was her fence on her land and she should be the one to finish the job. "That should hold now," he said with satisfaction, testing the post with his full weight. It did not budge. "You have got good instincts for this kind of work." "My father taught me," Clara said, brushing dirt from her hands. "He said a person ought to be able to take care of their own property, man or woman. Some of the neighbors thought he was filling my head with nonsense, but he was insistent." "Sounds like he was a wise man." "He was," Clara agreed quietly. "I miss him every day." There was a moment of silence, respectful and understanding, before Clara shook herself and gestured toward the house. "Come on, I promised you lunch, and I am not breaking my word." The cabin was hot inside despite the small windows, but Clara had made a cold potato salad the night before, and there was bread from her last baking day and fresh eggs from her chickens. It was simple food, nothing fancy, but Cord ate like it was a feast, complimenting her cooking with genuine appreciation. "You live in town?" Clara asked as they ate, curiosity finally getting the better of her manners. "Got a room at the boarding house," Cord replied. "Just temporary. I have been working odd jobs here and there, saving up to buy some land of my own." "What kind of land?" "Cattle ranch, ideally," he said, and there was something in his voice that made Clara look up from her plate. It was the sound of a dream, she realized, the kind of hope that people carried inside them, like a banked fire. "Nothing huge, just enough to run a small herd, make an honest living. I have been cowboying for other men since I was 15, and I am ready to work for myself for a change." "That sounds wonderful," Clara said honestly. "Do you have somewhere in mind?" "There is a property about 10 miles north of here," Cord told her. 500 acres with good water access, some natural shelter for cattle. Owner is an old-timer named Gus Crawford, and he is looking to retire back east to live with his daughter. We have been negotiating price, but it is slow going. He wants to make sure it goes to someone who will treat the land right." "That seems reasonable." "It is," Cord agreed. "I respect it, actually. But it means I am stuck in limbo for a while, working odd jobs and waiting." Clara understood limbo. She had been living in it for 6 months, ever since her father's cough turned serious, and she realized he was not going to recover. "Waiting is harder than working sometimes," she said. "It truly is." Cord looked at her across the table, and there was something in his eyes that made Clara's heart skip. "But days like today make it easier. Good company makes everything more bearable." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the temperature. "You are good company yourself, Mr. Cordell." "Cord," he corrected gently. "Please. Mr. Cordell makes me feel like I should be wearing a suit and going to church." "Cord, then," Clara agreed, liking the way his name felt in her mouth. Easy and comfortable, like worn leather. "And you should call me Clara. Miss Bennett makes me feel like a school teacher." "Clara." He said it softly, testing it, and she liked the way it sounded in his rough voice even better than she liked saying his name. "It suits you, strong but pretty." Now her cheeks were definitely burning. "You are a flatterer, Cord." "Just honest," he replied. But he was grinning now, clearly pleased to have flustered her. They finished lunch in comfortable conversation, talking about nothing important and everything at once. Clara learned that Cord had been born in Texas, that he had left home at 15 to work cattle drives, that he had seen most of the Western territories and decided Nevada was where he wanted to put down roots. He learned that she had grown up in Missouri, that her mother had died when she was 12, that her father had brought her west, chasing the dream of silver, and found only enough to keep them fed and sheltered, but never wealthy. "Do you regret it?" Cord asked. "Coming west?" Clara thought about it carefully. "No," she said finally. "It has been hard, and it will probably continue being hard. But there is something about this land that feels like freedom. Back in Missouri, I would have been expected to marry young, have children, be satisfied with running a household. Here, I can own property. I can make my own decisions. I can be more than someone's wife or daughter. You should be able to be all of those things anywhere, Cord said. And there was an edge to his voice that Clara recognized from the day before, that anger at injustice that seemed to be part of his core character. Should does not mean is, Clara replied. But I am grateful for what I have here, even when it is difficult. Cord nodded slowly. I understand that. The wanting to build something that is yours, even when the world makes it harder than it needs to be. Exactly, Clara said, relieved to be understood so completely by someone she had only just met. When lunch was finished and Cord finally rose to leave, Clara walked him out to where his horse waited patiently at the fence. The sun was high now, the heat shimmering off the desert floor in waves, and she knew he had a hot ride back to town ahead of him. Thank you, she said as he gathered his reins. For the bullets yesterday, and for the help with the fence today. I will find a way to repay you. No repayment necessary, Cord said firmly. He swung up into the saddle, settling there with the ease of long practice. But I might ride out again in a few days, if that would be all right with you. Check on that fence, make sure it is holding. Clara smiled up at him, shading her eyes against the sun. That would be all right with me, she said. That would be more than all right. His answering smile was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. Then I will see you soon, Clara Bennett. I will count on it, Cord. He touched his hat to her one more time, then turned his horse and rode off across the desert, and Clara stood watching until he was just a dark spot against the endless blue sky. The next few days passed in a strange mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Clara went about her work with her usual determination, tending to her garden and her chickens, hauling water and mending tack and doing all the 100 small tasks that kept a property running. But underneath it all, she found herself listening for hoofbeats, watching the horizon for a familiar rider, her heart jumping at every sound that might signal his arrival. He came back 3 days later, just as the sun was starting to dip toward the western mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. Clara was in her garden, wrestling with weeds that seemed determined to choke out her tomato plants, when she heard his approach. She stood up quickly, brushing dirt from her hands and wishing she had thought to check her appearance in a mirror before coming outside this morning. Evening, Cord called as he dismounted. Hope I'm not interrupting. Just fighting with weeds, Clara replied, walking over to meet him at the fence. They are winning, I think. Weeds usually do, Cord said with a sympathetic smile. It is a never-ending battle. He looked past her toward the house, then back at her with something like hesitation in his expression. I was wondering if you might have time for a ride. There is something I would like to show you, if you are interested. Clara felt her pulse quicken. A ride? Nothing improper, Cord said quickly. Just up to that ridge I mentioned, where the coyotes have been denning. I found it yesterday, and I thought you might want to see it for yourself, help you plan if you decide to do something about it. It was practical, sensible, the kind of thing a helpful neighbor would offer. But there was something in the way Cord asked, something in the careful hope in his eyes, that made Clara understand this was about more than coyotes. I would like that, she said. Let me saddle my father's horse. Her father's horse was a sturdy buckskin mare named Daisy, reliable if not particularly quick. Clara saddled her with practiced efficiency, and within 10 minutes they were riding north together, the desert spreading out around them in all directions like an ocean of stone and sage. Cord kept his roan to an easy walk, matching Daisy's pace, and they rode in comfortable silence for a while. The evening air was cooler than the day had been, carrying the scent of dust and creosote, and Clara found herself relaxing into the saddle in a way she had not relaxed in months. You ride well, Cord observed. My father taught me that too, Clara said. He believed in teaching me everything he knew, just in case something happened to him. Her throat tightened. Turns out he was right to worry. He was preparing you, Cord said gently. That is not the same as worrying. That is love. Clara blinked against the sudden sting in her eyes. Yes, she said softly. Yes, it was. They rode on, and Cord told her about his work over the past few days, about helping to repair the roof on the church after a windstorm had torn off some shingles, about breaking a particularly stubborn horse for one of the local ranchers. Clara told him about finally getting her tomatoes to set fruit, about selling a dozen eggs to the restaurant in town and feeling absurdly proud of the small income. Every bit counts when you are building something, Cord said. You should be proud. I am, Clara admitted, though I wish it did not feel like such a struggle every single day. It gets easier, Cord told her. Not easy, but easier. At least that is what Gus tells me about ranching. The first few years are the hardest, and then you find your rhythm. How much longer until you can buy his place? Clara asked. Cord was quiet for a moment. Couple more months maybe. I am close, but not quite there yet. And Gus will not sell until he is sure I am serious and capable. He would be a fool to doubt that, Clara said with more vehemence than she intended. You are one of the most capable people I have met. Cord glanced at her, and there was something warm and surprised in his expression. Thank you, he said. That means more than you might think. The ridge was higher than Clara had expected, a tumble of red rocks and scattered juniper trees overlooking a small canyon. Cord dismounted first and helped Clara down, his hands steady on her waist, lingering just a fraction longer than necessary. Together they walked to the edge and looked down into the canyon below. There, Cord said, pointing. See that outcropping about halfway down? That is where they are denning. Clara could just make out the dark shapes of coyotes moving among the rocks, several adults and what looked like half-grown pups. There are so many, she breathed. Big pack, Cord agreed. They will keep causing problems for everyone in the area unless something is done. But I wanted you to see it first, understand what you would be dealing with if you decided to take action. What would you do? Clara asked. Me? Cord considered. I would probably take out the alpha if I could, like I mentioned before. The rest would likely scatter, find new territory. But it is risky, especially alone. If you missed or just wounded it, you could have a very angry coyote coming at you, and they are faster than you think. So you are saying I should not try it alone. I am saying you should not have to try it alone, Cord corrected. If you want to deal with this, I will come with you. 2 guns are better than 1, and I have done this kind of thing before. Clara looked at him, at the serious set of his jaw and the concern in his storm blue eyes, and felt something shift deep inside her chest. He was not trying to take over or prove himself superior. He was simply offering partnership, equality, the kind of respect she had been craving since her father died. I would appreciate that, she said quietly. Very much. Cord nodded, satisfied. Then he surprised her by walking over to a flat rock and sitting down, patting the space beside him. We have got a good view from up here. Seems a shame to waste it. Clara joined him, settling onto the sun-warmed stone, and together they watched the sun sink lower toward the mountains. The desert transformed in the changing light, going from gold to rose to deep purple, the shadows lengthening and the air cooling by degrees. This is beautiful, Clara said softly. It is, Cord agreed. But when Clara glanced at him, she found he was not looking at the sunset. He was looking at her, her breath caught. Cord, I know this is fast, he said, his voice low and rough. I know we barely know each other, but I cannot stop thinking about you, Clara, about your courage and your strength and the way you refuse to let this town beat you down, about the way you smile when you talk about your tomatoes setting fruit, and the way you look when you are working, all fierce concentration and determination. I think about you all the time, and I do not know what to do with that, except be honest about it. Clara's heart was pounding so hard, she was sure he must be able to hear it. I think about you too, she admitted, more than I probably should. Why should not you? Cord asked, and now he was smiling, that almost smile that transformed his whole face. I am thinking about you. Seems only fair you return the favor. Clara laughed, the sound startled out of her by his easy confidence. You are presumptuous. I am honest. He corrected. There is a difference. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and tucked a loose curl behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek, rough and warm. I like you, Clara Bennett, more than like you, if I'm being completely truthful, and I would very much like to spend more time with you, if you are amenable to that. I am amenable, Clara whispered, leaning into his touch despite every rational thought telling her to be careful. Very amenable. Good, Cord said softly. Then, even more slowly, he leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull back. But Clara did not pull back. Instead, she leaned in closer, her hand coming up to rest on his chest where she could feel his heart beating as hard as her own. The kiss deepened, still gentle but more certain now, and Clara felt something bloom inside her that was part desire and part something more tender, more terrifying. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing a little harder, Cord rested his forehead against hers. "I have been wanting to do that since the day I met you," he admitted. "I am glad you did," Clara said, and found she meant it more than she had meant anything in a long time. They stayed on the ridge until the stars began to emerge, talking quietly about everything and nothing, stealing kisses between words, learning the shape of each other in this new context. Cord told her about his dreams for the ranch, about wanting to build something lasting and good. Clara told him about her fears of failing, of losing her father's land, of ending up back east married to some man who would expect her to be meek and biddable. "You could never be meek," Cord said with certainty, "and any man who expected you to be would be a fool not worthy of you." "You say that now," Clara teased, "but what if I am terribly difficult to live with?" "Then you will be difficult, and I will be stubborn, and we will figure it out together," Cord replied easily. The casual mention of a future, of together, made Clara's heart skip, but she did not correct him. She did not want to. Because sitting here with him, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, she could almost believe in that future herself. They rode back to her property under starlight, the horses picking their way carefully through the desert night. At her fence, Cord dismounted first and helped Clara down, his hand strong and sure on her waist. "I should go," he said reluctantly, "but I will come back in a few days, and we can deal with those coyotes if you want." "I want," Clara confirmed. Then, on impulse, she rose on her toes and kissed him again, quick and sweet. "Ride safe." "Always do," Cord promised. But he was grinning as he swung back into the saddle, and Clara was smiling as she watched him ride away into the night. The next week passed in a haze of anticipation and cautious joy. Cord came by twice more, once to help Clara repair a section of her roof that had been leaking, and once simply to share an evening meal and talk until the stars came out. Each visit felt both entirely natural and impossibly significant, as if they were building something together, one conversation at a time. The people in Silverton noticed, of course. A town that small had no concept of private business. Clara endured the looks and whispers with her chin held high, refusing to be ashamed of accepting help from a good man who treated her with respect. Mrs. Henderson made a pointed comment about propriety when Clara came into town for supplies, and Clara smiled sweetly and told her that propriety was easier to maintain when merchants actually sold women what they needed, instead of forcing them to rely on the kindness of strangers. The older woman had gone red-faced and silent, and Clara had walked out of the dry goods store with her head high and her heart singing with petty triumph. When Cord heard about the exchange, he laughed so hard he had to sit down. "I wish I could have seen her face," he said, wiping his eyes. "That woman has been the arbiter of morality in this town for too long. About time someone stood up to her." "I am tired of apologizing for existing," Clara said simply. "If they want to talk, let them talk." "That is my girl," Cord said warmly, and Clara felt a thrill run through her at the possessive endearment. On a cool morning, a week and a half after their sunset on the ridge, Cord arrived before dawn with his rifle and a determined expression. "Ready to deal with those coyotes?" he asked. Clara had been ready since the night before, her father's gun cleaned and loaded, her resolve steeled. "Let me saddle Daisy," she said. They rode out together through the pre-dawn darkness, the desert slowly lightening around them as the sun prepared to rise. The ridge looked different in the morning light, less romantic and more businesslike, and Clara felt her nervous excitement settle into focused calm. Cord helped her find a good position among the rocks, somewhere with clear sight lines down into the canyon and enough cover to keep them concealed. Then he settled beside her, his rifle ready, his presence solid and reassuring. "The alpha will be the biggest," he said quietly. "Probably a male. He will come out first when the sun rises, check the territory. That is when you want to take your shot." "What if I miss?" Clara asked. "Then I will back you up," Cord said simply. "That is why I'm here." The sun rose slowly, painting the canyon in shades of pink and gold. Clara kept her breathing steady, her hands relaxed on her gun, the way her father had taught her. Beside her, Cord was utterly still, patient as stone. Then, just as the first direct sunlight hit the canyon floor, A large coyote emerged from the den. It was big, probably 40 pounds, its coat thick and healthy. It stood at the mouth of the den and stretched, then raised its head to scent the air, completely unaware of the danger above. "That is him," Cord whispered. "You're shot." Clara raised her gun, sighted carefully down the barrel, adjusted for distance and wind the way her father had drilled into her. The coyote turned slightly, presenting a clean shot at the chest. Clara let out half a breath, steadied, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked across the canyon, echoing off the rocks. The coyote dropped instantly, dead before it hit the ground. The rest of the pack erupted from the den in a chaos of yelping and scrambling, scattering in all directions, fleeing the death of their leader. Clara lowered her gun, her hands shaking now that it was over. "I did it," she breathed. "You did," Cord confirmed, and there was pride in his voice, warm and genuine. "Perfect shot. Your father taught you well." They stayed on the ridge for another hour, watching to make sure the pack had truly scattered. The coyotes did not return. Without their alpha, they would find new territory, become someone else's problem, or, more likely, break into smaller groups that would be easier for individual ranchers to manage. "Your chickens should be safer now," Cord said as they finally mounted up to ride back. "And so should everyone else's livestock in the area." "It feels good," Clara admitted, "being able to solve my own problems." "You have been solving your own problems all along," Cord pointed out. "You just did not have the tools you needed until now." Back at her property, Clara felt emboldened by success and sunrise, and the way Cord looked at her like she was something special. When he made to leave, she caught his hand. "Stay for breakfast," she said. "Please. I want to celebrate, and celebrating alone seems wrong somehow." Cord's smile was like dawn breaking, warm and full of light. "I would like that," he said. "I would like that very much." Clara made eggs and bacon and fresh biscuits, and they ate on her porch while the sun climbed higher and the desert heated up around them. They talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in each other's presence in a way that felt earned now, built on shared experiences and growing trust. "Gus Crawford came to see me yesterday," Cord said as they were finishing up. "He has agreed to sell me the ranch." Clara felt her heart leap. "Cord, that is wonderful. When?" "End of next month," Cord said, and there was excitement in his voice tempered by something more complicated. "Which means I need to start making serious plans, getting ready to move operations, figuring out what stock to buy first." "That sounds like a lot of work," Clara observed. "It will be," Cord agreed. He was quiet for a moment, looking out at the desert, his expression thoughtful. Then he turned to her, and there was something vulnerable in his eyes that she had not seen before. "Clara, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." "All right," Clara said, her pulse quickening. "What are we doing here?" Cord asked. "I know what I hope we are doing, what I feel when I'm with you, but I need to know what you feel, what you want, because if I am about to start building a life here, I need to know if you might want to be part of it." Clara felt the air leave her lungs in a rush. It was too fast, surely too soon to be having this conversation. They had known each other for less than a month. But as she looked at Cord, at his honest face and hopeful eyes, she realized that time was not always the most important measure. Sometimes you just knew. "I care about you," she said carefully. "More than I expected to, more than I probably should, given how recently we met. When I am with you, I feel seen and respected in a way I have not felt since my father died. You make me laugh, and you make me feel capable. And when you kiss me, I feel like I am standing on the edge of something wonderful and terrifying all at once." "That is exactly how I feel," Cord said softly. "But I am scared," Clara continued. "Scared of losing myself, scared of becoming dependent, scared of giving up the independence I have fought so hard to maintain." Cord reached out and took her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her wrist. "I do not want you to lose yourself," he said. "I do not want you to become dependent or give up anything you have fought for. What I want is a partner, Clara, someone to build a life with, side by side, equal to equal. I want you to keep your land, keep your independence, keep being exactly who you are. I just want to be beside you while you do it." "That sounds impossibly good," Clara whispered. "It does not have to be impossible," Cord said. "People build partnerships like that all the time. It just takes work and honesty and a willingness to keep choosing each other even when it gets hard." He paused. I am willing to do that work, Clara. The question is, are you? Clara looked at him, at this good man who had bought her bullets when no one else would, who had helped with her fence and her roof and her coyote problem without ever once making her feel small or incapable. She thought about the future he was offering, full of hard work and uncertainty, but also companionship and respect, and the kind of love that felt like partnership rather than possession. Yes, she said, the word coming out strong and certain. Yes, I am willing. Cord's smile was incandescent. He pulled her close and kissed her deeply, thoroughly, until Clara was breathless and laughing against his mouth. I am going to marry you, Clara Bennett, he said against her lips. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next month, but soon. Because I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you, and I am not fool enough to let that go. I am going to hold you to that, Clara said, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. No backing out now. Would not dream of it, Cord promised. The next month was a whirlwind of activity. Cord was busy with preparations for taking over the ranch, spending long days riding out to survey his new property, making lists of supplies and stock he would need, meeting with Gus Crawford to learn everything the old man could teach him about the land and water sources, and the best places to graze cattle. But he still found time to ride out to Clara's place 3 or 4 times a week, often bringing dinner or helping with whatever project she had going. Clara found herself falling more in love with him each time they met. She loved his laugh, warm and genuine. She loved the way he listened when she talked, really listened, asking thoughtful questions and remembering details. She loved his hands, calloused and capable, and the way he touched her like she was precious. She loved his determination to build something good, his refusal to cut corners or take the easy path. And Cord was equally smitten. He told her constantly how much he admired her strength, her fierce independence, the way she refused to be diminished by circumstance. He brought her small gifts, practical things like nails for her fence and seeds for her garden, but also wildflowers picked from the desert and a book of poetry he thought she might like. He made her laugh and challenged her thinking and kissed her until her knees went weak. 6 weeks after they met, on a cool evening in early autumn, Cord rode up to her property with something tucked in his saddlebag and a determined expression on his face. Clara met him at the fence, smiling at the sight of him, and he pulled her into a kiss before she could even say hello. I have something for you, he said when they finally broke apart. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small wooden box, polished smooth and dark with age. This was my grandmother's, he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold ring set with a small blue stone. My father gave it to my mother, and my mother gave it to me before she died, told me to give it to someone special someday. Clara felt tears prick at her eyes as she looked at the ring, delicate and beautiful in the evening light. Cord, I know it has only been 6 weeks, he said quickly. I know that is fast, that people will talk, that you might want more time, but I also know that I love you, Clara Bennett. I love your courage and your stubbornness, and the way you look at the world like it is full of challenges to overcome rather than obstacles to avoid. I love the way you make me want to be better, work harder, build something worthy of you, and I want to spend the rest of my life loving you, if you will let me. He dropped to one knee right there in the dirt beside her fence, holding up the ring box like an offering. Will you marry me, Clara? Will you be my partner and my wife, and the person I get to wake up next to for the rest of my life? Clara was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but she was also smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. Yes, she said, her voice breaking on the word. Yes, of course I will marry you. Cord surged to his feet and pulled her into his arms, kissing her fiercely, and Clara kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying at once, Cord took the ring from the box and slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the blue stone catching the last rays of the setting sun. We should tell people, Clara said breathlessly. The town is going to have opinions. Let them, Cord said firmly. We will get married as soon as we can arrange it, and then they can say whatever they want. We will be too busy building our life together to care. They decided on 3 weeks, just enough time to arrange for the preacher and witnesses, and for Clara to make herself a simple dress. The town did indeed have opinions, with Mrs. Henderson leading the chorus of disapproval about hasty marriages and improper courtships. But there were also unexpected allies. Gus Crawford came into town specially to congratulate them, shaking Cord's hand and kissing Clara's cheek and telling anyone who would listen that Cord was getting himself a fine woman and Clara was getting herself a fine man, and they were lucky to have found each other. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect autumn day that felt like a gift from the universe. Clara dressed carefully in her new dress, simple blue calico that brought out her eyes, and pinned her hair up the way her mother had taught her years ago. She looked at herself in the small mirror that had been her mother's and barely recognized the woman looking back, so full of joy and anticipation. The ceremony took place in the small church at the edge of town, with Gus Crawford and the doctor standing as witnesses and a handful of other townspeople filling the pews. Clara walked down the aisle alone, her head high, and found Cord waiting for her at the altar in his best clothes, with his hat in his hands and his eyes full of love. The preacher kept it short and simple, which suited them both just fine. They spoke their vows in clear voices, promising to love and honor and support each other through whatever came. And when the preacher finally said Cord could kiss his bride, Cord did so with such enthusiasm that several people in the audience laughed. "Hello, wife," he said softly when they broke apart. "Hello, husband," Clara replied, testing out the word and finding she liked it very much. They held a small reception at the boarding house where Cord had been staying, with cake and coffee and several of the townspeople who had decided that maybe this hasty marriage was not so scandalous after all. Gus Crawford gave a rambling toast about young love and new beginnings that made Clara tear up. And then, as the sun was setting, Cord helped Clara onto Daisy and mounted his own roan, and they rode out together toward the ranch that would be their new home. The house on the Crawford ranch was bigger than Clara's cabin, a proper ranch house with 4 rooms and a covered porch and a roof that did not leak anywhere. Gus had left it furnished, the furniture worn but serviceable, and Cord had spent the past few weeks cleaning and preparing it for their arrival. "Welcome home, Mrs. Cordell," he said as he helped her down from Daisy, and Clara felt a thrill run through her at the sound of her new name. "It is perfect," she said honestly, looking around at the house and the land stretching out beyond it. Truly perfect. That night, as they lay together in their marriage bed, Clara felt a sense of peace settle over her that she had not felt in years. She was married to a good man who loved her. She had land and purpose and a future full of possibility. The road ahead would not be easy, she knew that. Ranching was hard work, and they would face challenges and setbacks and probably their share of failures. But they would face it all together, partners in the truest sense, and that made all the difference. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Cord replied, pulling her closer. "Always." The first year of their marriage was everything Clara had expected, and nothing like she imagined. The work was backbreaking and constant, from sunup to well past sundown most days. They bought a small herd of cattle with the last of Cord's savings, and some money they got from selling Clara's father's claim to a prospector who thought he saw potential in the land. The cattle were stubborn and prone to wandering, and Clara learned to ride herd and rope strays and doctor sick animals with varying degrees of success. Cord was patient with her inexperience and generous with his knowledge, teaching her everything he knew about cattle and ranching. But he also deferred to her judgment on many things, especially when it came to the practical running of the household and the small vegetable garden she insisted on maintaining, despite the demands on their time. They worked side by side, partners in every sense, and Clara found herself falling more in love with him each day. Their first winter was harsh, with snow that blocked the passes and temperatures that dropped so low the water in the horse trough froze solid. They lost 3 head of cattle to the cold, and Clara cried over each loss like they were family. But they also spent long evenings by the fire, Cord reading aloud from the newspaper or the poetry book he had given her, while Clara mended clothes or worked on the quilt she was piecing together from scraps. "We will build this up," Cord said one particularly cold night, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the fire. "Slowly, year by year, until we have something really solid. And then maybe we will think about expanding, bringing in more stock, maybe even hiring some help." "I like it being just us," Clara admitted. "Is that selfish?" "Not selfish," Cord said, kissing the top of her head. "Practical. We need to get our feet under us before we bring anyone else into it. But someday, Clara, I want to build something we can pass on. To our children. if we are blessed with them. Clara's hand went instinctively to her still flat stomach. They had been trying, in the casual way of newly married couples who wanted a family but were not in a desperate hurry. So far nothing had taken, but Clara was not worried yet. Her mother had always said these things happened in their own time. Spring came eventually, as it always did, bringing warmth and new grass and the promise of easier days ahead. Their cattle made it through the winter leaner but alive, and they bred well that season. Clara planted her garden with renewed enthusiasm, determined to grow enough vegetables to sell in town and supplement their income from the cattle. It was late spring, almost summer, when Clara realized her monthly courses had not come for the second time. She waited another week, not wanting to say anything until she was sure, but when the third week passed with no sign, and she found herself feeling queasy in the mornings, she knew. She told Cord that evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, the same way they had done on the ridge the first time he kissed her. "I am pregnant," she said simply. Cord went very still beside her. Then he turned to look at her, his eyes searching her face. "Are you sure?" "Pretty sure," Clara said. "All the signs are there. I figure I am about 2 months along, maybe a little more." A slow smile spread across Cord's face, transforming him from weathered rancher to delighted husband in an instant. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly, then louder, more certain. "We are going to have a baby!" He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully like she might break, and Clara laughed against his chest at his sudden excessive caution. "I am not made of glass," she reminded him. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. Not my wife having my baby," Cord pointed out. "That is different." Clara's pregnancy was relatively easy, all things considered. She was sick in the mornings for the first few months, but it passed by the time she started showing. Cord was simultaneously amazed and terrified by the changes in her body, treating her like she was the most precious thing in the world, while also clearly struggling with how to help. "You are hovering," Clara told him one afternoon in late summer, when he had insisted on carrying a basket of laundry that she was perfectly capable of carrying herself. "I am being helpful," Cord corrected. "You are being overprotective," Clara said, but she was smiling because his concern came from love, and how could she be truly annoyed by that? They made preparations as autumn approached, and Clara's belly grew round and firm. Cord built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and carving small designs into the headboard. Clara sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small everything was, how impossibly delicate. They argued good-naturedly about names, with Cord favoring family names and Clara wanting something fresh and new. The baby came in early October, on a crisp morning when the leaves on the cottonwoods by the creek were just starting to turn gold. Clara's labor started just after dawn, and Cord rode like the devil himself was chasing him to fetch the midwife from town. By the time they returned, Clara's pains were coming hard and fast, and she was gripping the bedpost with white-knuckled determination. The midwife, a competent older woman named Mrs. Abel, shooed Cord out of the room despite his protests. Clara heard him pacing in the main room, his boots making worried tracks across the wooden floor, and between contractions she found herself smiling at his anxiety. The labor was long and difficult, lasting well into the afternoon. There were moments when Clara was sure she could not continue, when the pain was so intense she could not imagine surviving it. But Mrs. Abel was steady and encouraging, and the knowledge that Cord was right outside the door waiting for her gave Clara strength she did not know she possessed. Finally, as the sun was starting to dip toward the western mountains, Clara gave one last tremendous push and felt the baby slip free. There was a moment of breathless silence, and then a thin, reedy wail filled the room. "It is a boy," Mrs. Abel announced, placing the squalling, messy infant on Clara's chest. A fine, healthy boy. Clara looked down at her son, at his red face and dark hair and tiny fists waving in indignation, and felt love crash over her like a wave. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Hello, my beautiful boy." The door burst open, and Cord rushed in, his face pale with worry that transformed to wonder when he saw Clara holding their child. Are you—" "We are both fine," Clara assured him, exhausted but glowing with joy. "Come meet your son." Cord approached the bed like he was in a church, reverent and awed. He looked down at the baby, and Clara watched as tears began to stream down her husband's weathered cheeks. "He is perfect," Cord breathed. "You are perfect. Both of you?" They named him Thomas, after Cord's father, with James as a middle name after Cord himself. Little Tommy was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in reasonable stretches, though Clara and Cord still spent the first few weeks in a sleep-deprived haze of diaper changes and midnight feedings and overwhelming love. "I never knew I could feel like this," Cord said one night, holding his sleeping son against his chest while Clara dozed on the bed. "Like my heart is too big for my body." "I know exactly what you mean," Clara murmured. The years that followed were full and challenging and more joyful than Clara could have imagined. The ranch grew slowly but steadily, their herd increasing year by year until they were turning a modest but reliable profit. They hired their first ranch hand when Tommy was 2, a young man fresh from Texas who was eager to learn and willing to work hard. By the time Tommy was 4, they had 3 hands working for them and plans to expand their grazing land. Clara proved to have a head for the business side of ranching, keeping meticulous records and negotiating fair prices for their cattle. Cord handled the day-to-day operations, the hard physical work of managing stock and land. Together, they made an effective team, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly. When Tommy was 5, Clara found herself pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first, with more sickness and more fatigue, and Clara was secretly relieved when the midwife told her she was carrying twins. "That explains why I am so exhausted," Clara said. "There are 2 of them wearing me out instead of just 1. The twins, born in the spring of 1890, were both girls, identical to the point where even Clara sometimes had trouble telling them apart in those early days. They named them Rose and Lily, flower names that matched their delicate beauty. Tommy was enchanted by his new sisters, helping Clara with them whenever he could, fetching diapers and singing to them when they fussed. With 3 children and a growing ranch operation, life became even busier. Clara often felt like she was juggling too many things at once, trying to be a good mother and a good wife and a good business partner all at the same time. But Cord was endlessly supportive, taking night feedings when he could, entertaining the children when Clara needed a break, always making sure she knew how much he loved and appreciated her. "I could not do this without you," Clara told him one evening, when the twins were about 6 months old. Tommy was finally asleep after a long day of energetic play, and the girls were nursing simultaneously, one at each breast. "Any of this, the ranch, the children, the life we have built, none of it would be possible without you." "Same goes for me," Cord said softly. He was sitting beside her, one hand gentle on her shoulder. "You are the strongest person I know, Clara. The way you manage everything, keep us all together, keep pushing forward even when things are hard. You amaze me every single day." As the children grew, so did the ranch. By 1895, they were running several hundred head of cattle and had built on 2 more rooms to the house to accommodate their expanding family. Tommy, now 11, was old enough to help seriously with the ranch work, riding out with his father to check fences and move cattle. The twins at 5 were wild and fearless, always getting into mischief, but also bringing laughter and light into every day. Clara was 34 now, Cord 38, and they had settled into their lives with the comfortable ease of people who had built something real and lasting together. The townspeople who had once whispered about their hasty marriage now pointed to them as an example of what a good partnership looked like. Even Mrs. Henderson had softened over the years, occasionally complimenting Clara on her well-behaved children or the quality of the vegetables she brought to town to sell. One evening in late summer, after the children were in bed, Clara and Cord sat on their porch as they had done countless times over the years. The ranch stretched out before them, prosperous and peaceful, the result of over a decade of hard work and determination. "Do you ever think about that day in town?" Clara asked, "when Milton Sharp refused to sell me bullets?" "All the time," Cord admitted. "Best thing that ever happened to me, his stubbornness. If he had just sold you what you needed, I might never have worked up the courage to talk to you." "I think you would have," Clara said. "Found some other excuse, some other way to help. That is just who you are." "Maybe," Cord allowed. "But I am grateful it happened the way it did, grateful for every moment that led us here." Clara leaned into his shoulder, feeling his arm come around her automatically, perfectly fitted after years of practice. "I am grateful too," she said, "for all of it. Even the hard parts, because they made the good parts even better." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the desert in familiar shades of gold and purple. Somewhere inside, one of the twins laughed in her sleep, and Clara felt a rush of contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. This life they had built, this family, this partnership, it was everything she had never known she wanted. And it had all started with a simple act of kindness, a man buying bullets for a woman who needed them and placing them gently in her hand. The years continued to roll by, bringing both challenges and triumphs. In 1897, a harsh winter decimated their herd, and they spent months rebuilding their stock and their finances. In 1899, Tommy left for a year to attend school in Carson City, determined to learn modern ranching techniques. The twins grew into beautiful young women, strong and capable like their mother, gentle and determined like their father. In 1902, when Clara was 41 and Cord was 45, Tommy brought home a young woman named Sarah, a rancher's daughter from the next county over. They were clearly in love, and watching them together reminded Clara so much of herself and Cord at that age that it made her heart ache in the best possible way. Tommy and Sarah married in the spring of 1903 in the same small church where Clara and Cord had spoken their vows 20 years earlier. The twins served as bridesmaids, lovely in matching dresses, and Cord walked Sarah down the aisle because her own father had passed the year before. Clara cried through the entire ceremony, overwhelmed by joy and nostalgia in equal measure. "Our boy is a man now," Cord said that night as they lay in bed, his voice thick with emotion. "When did that happen?" "Gradually, then all at once," Clara replied. "The same way everything important happens." Tommy and Sarah built a small house on the far edge of the property, and Tommy took over more and more of the daily ranch operations as Cord started to slow down. Cord never complained, but Clara noticed him moving more carefully, taking longer to recover from hard days of work. They were getting older, both of them, and while Clara tried not to think about it too much, she was also pragmatic enough to be grateful they had raised a son capable of carrying on what they had built. In 1905, the twins both married within a month of each other, Rose to a banker from Silverton, and Lily to a young lawyer who had just opened a practice in town. Clara found herself suddenly with an empty nest, and the silence in the house was deafening at first. "Just us again," Cord observed one evening, echoing what Clara had said so many years ago about liking it when it was just the two of them. "Just us," Clara agreed. But instead of feeling sad, she found herself feeling liberated. They had raised their children well, launched them into the world with the tools and values they needed. Now it was time to enjoy what they had built together. They traveled some in those years, taking trips to San Francisco and Denver, seeing sights they had only read about in newspapers. They spent long evenings on their porch, watching sunsets and talking about everything and nothing. They made love with the easy familiarity of people who knew each other's bodies as well as their own, finding joy and comfort in each other's arms. In 1908, Tommy and Sarah gave them their first grandchild, a boy they named James after his grandfather. Cord cried when he held his grandson for the first time, just as he had cried when holding his own son, and Clara fell in love all over again, watching her strong husband be gentle with this tiny new life. More grandchildren followed, from Tommy and Sarah, and then from the twins. By 1912, Clara and Cord had 6 grandchildren, ranging from infant to 4 years old, and their house was often full of noise and laughter and the chaos of young children. "I thought I was tired when our 3 were little," Cord said one evening after all the grandchildren had finally gone home with their parents. "But this is a whole different level of exhaustion. The difference is we can give them back," Clara said with a laugh. "That makes it much more bearable." They were in their 50s now, Clara 51 and Cord 55, and while they were both still active and healthy, they had also learned to appreciate rest and quiet. The ranch ran itself mostly, with Tommy fully in charge and several experienced hands helping with the work. Clara and Cord had transitioned into a kind of advisory role, available for guidance, but no longer carrying the daily burden of operations. "We did it," Cord said one evening in 1914, as they sat on their porch watching yet another desert sunset. It was a familiar view, unchanged in all the years they had lived here, and yet it never got old. "We built something real and lasting, something we can be proud of." "We did," Clara agreed. She reached over and took his hand, their fingers intertwining automatically after 30 years of marriage. "And we did it together, just like you promised we would." "Best decision I ever made," Cord said, "buying those bullets for you." Clara laughed. "Best decision I ever made was saying yes when you asked me to marry you." "You almost said no?" Cord teased. "I did not know that was even a possibility." "It was not," Clara admitted. "I was too far gone on you already, but I could have played harder to get, at least." "Glad you did not," Cord said, squeezing her hand. "I am not sure my heart could have taken the suspense." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of red and gold and purple. Clara thought about everything that had brought them to this moment, from that dusty afternoon in Silverton when Milton Sharp had refused her service, through all the years of hard work and joy and challenge and love. She thought about their children, grown and successful and happy, about their grandchildren, full of promise and possibility. She thought about the land they had tended and the life they had built, brick by brick, day by day, together. "I love you," she said softly, the words as true now as they had been the first time she said them. "I love you too," Cord replied. "Always have, always will." The years that followed were gentle, full of the kind of quiet contentment that comes from a life well lived. They watched their grandchildren grow, attended school plays and birthday parties, offered advice when asked, and kept quiet when it was not. They took care of each other as age brought its inevitable challenges, Cord helping Clara when her knees ached from old injuries, Clara helping Cord when his back went out from years of hard ranch work. In 1920, they celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary with a large party attended by children and grandchildren and most of the town of Silverton. Someone made a speech about how they were an inspiration, a testament to what love and partnership could accomplish. Clara and Cord stood together, holding hands, and accepted the praise with grace and humor. 35 years, Mrs. Henderson said, coming up to them after the speeches. She was ancient now, well into her 80s, but still sharp-eyed. "I will admit, when you two got married so quick, I thought it was a mistake. I am glad I was wrong." "So are we," Clara said with a smile, meaning it. That night, alone in their bedroom, Cord pulled Clara close. 35 years, he murmured against her hair. "And I would do every single one of them again, exactly the same way." "Even the hard parts?" Clara asked. "Especially the hard parts," Cord said. "They made us who we are. They made us stronger, together." Clara kissed him, deep and sweet, and felt the same spark she had felt in that ridge 35 years ago when he had kissed her for the first time. Some things, she thought, never changed. Some loves lasted forever. They continued on, into their 60s and then their 70s, their love deepening with each passing year. They buried old friends and celebrated new great-grandchildren. They watched the world change around them, automobiles replacing horses, electricity coming to even remote ranches like theirs. But through it all, they remained constant, partners in every sense of the word. In 1932, as Clara approached her 71st birthday and Cord his 75th, they sat together on their porch one evening, just as they had done thousands of times before. The ranch was thriving under Tommy's management, now with his own adult children helping. The family they had started had grown into something vast and beautiful, with children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carrying their legacy forward into the future. "No regrets?" Cord asked, his voice still strong despite his age. "Not a single one," Clara replied firmly. "You? Only that I did not buy you those bullets sooner," Cord said with the familiar almost smile that still made Clara's heart skip after nearly 50 years. Clara laughed, the sound bright and joyful in the evening air. "Then, I suppose we both got lucky that day. Lucky that Milton Sharp was a stubborn fool, lucky that you were in town, lucky that you saw someone who needed help and decided to provide it." "I saw a beautiful, fierce woman who refused to be beaten down by the world," Cord corrected. "And I knew right then that I wanted to spend the rest of my life knowing her, loving her, building something with her." "And you did," Clara said softly. "We did, together." As the sun set one more time over their desert home, painting the sky in those familiar shades they had watched together for decades, Clara leaned into her husband's embrace and felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for a simple act of kindness that had changed both their lives, for the courage to take a chance on love, for every day they had been given together. Their story had started with bullets in her hand and hope in her heart, and it had grown into something more beautiful than either of them could have imagined, a true partnership, a lasting love, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. And as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Clara and Cord sat together in the peace of their earned happiness, knowing that whatever time they had left, they would face it the same way they had faced everything else, hand in hand, heart to heart, together until the very end. The desert wind whispered around them, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of tomorrow, and in that moment, everything was exactly as it should be.